right, so for chapters. Hello. Chapters 10 to 15, the game plan would definitely be to touch base on the paint factory. And with the paint factory, kind of like the hospital scene that comes along with it. And then certainly kind of really focusing on Brother Jack and the Brotherhood. As you move forward into chapter 16 and on, Jack and the Brotherhood are going to be really the focal point of the book. So, Bledsoe, True Blood, you haven't really seen anything of them in chapters 10 to 15. They kind of like came and went. Brother Jack, Brotherhood are pretty much here to stay. So that's going to be something that we'll focus on tomorrow to kind of lead you into it. For, I'd say, the prologue through chapter 15, no secret here, there's a lot of symbolism, there's a lot of metaphorical concepts that are kind of going on, very abstract. I would say not that it all disappears, but chapter 16 on tends to have more of like a realism kind of viewpoint to it. So there'll be a little bit of a change, a little bit of a shift so far as the way that things are presented. A little bit more literal, less figurative. But certainly, motifs and figurative aspects are still going to be there. Knowing that this is where we'll really be focusing on today and then tomorrow, are there any other scenes or characters or questions with anything that you were reading that was kind of end up being problematic? So Ryan saying it was kind of reminding him of Cuckoo's Nest at the hospital scene. I think that's a pretty good one. And some folks are going, was that real? Was it a dream? Was it actually going on? Those would be things that we kind of touch on. It's real, or at least it's meant to be within the context of the book, not a dream sequence or anything like that. But any other little kind of details, events, things like that need to touch base on or want to touch base on?
Sure. Sure. The him working in the paint factory is only one day, right?
Yes. It's a bad day.
Okay.
And remember with the paint factory, so this is the job that Emerson tells him, the young Emerson tells him that I can hook you up with at the end of chapter 9. When he goes in there, there is labor strife that is going on with the union workers and the paint factory. So a question that people have been having is when he leaves Brockway, and before he comes back, and he goes up to the locker to grab lunch and all that kind of stuff, he's getting dirty looks from the workers there. It has nothing to do really with race. It's more because they know that he's hired to fill the place of a union worker, and so they're kind of looking at him as a scab. So when they call him a dirty, rotten fink kind of thing, there's not any racist, derogatory terms that are getting used. Calling him a fink is basically calling him a no-good, low-down cheater kind of guy. If you were watching Christmas Story, with Ralphie, and I can't put my arms down or whatnot, them calling each other a fink would be appropriate terminology for that kind of era that's going on. So he's upset, or they are mad at him just because of the whole labor thing, not because what's this black guy doing here in the paint factory. All right, so you reach chapter 16, you got the log, and touch base on that. I could see you being the one of the elves that are helping Santa Claus at the department store,
For sure.
throwing the kid down the slide and get out of here and all that kind of stuff.
I like how they unpeach the mother unwraps him.
Or in the bunny costume at the end. You could see Maddie being the pink bunny.
Yeah, she can apply it at Ross Park.
Yeah. All right, so Liberty Paints. What do we know about Liberty Paints? What are some details about Liberty Paints?
I think it's simple. Do you want literal or what I?
Let's start with details. What are some quote unquote facts that we know, and then we can kind of get into what do you know.
Long
All right, so we're in New York City.
Island.
which is away from Harlem. You know, it's not in his place where he kind of starts here within the prologue. So it's kind of him going into a little bit of new territory in a way.
Their number one bestseller is their Optic White.
So this is the right point.
So Optic White is the right white. And this is kind of meant to be a little bit of a pun as well. We were talking about wordplay yesterday that Ellison kind of does throughout. In the South, a common saying that would be happening is to be right is to be white, or white is right. You know, similar kind of play with that. So optic white is the right white. Certainly the use of crossing that out. The use of that phrase, I would say, is pretty purposeful on Allison's part that he's kind of playing off of that. That's the kind of like the verbal slogan. Anyone remember what's on the paint on the building itself? Like, what is the motto of the company as he's walking across the bridge for the first time? It's not that one. It's similar. Keep America pure. And then it just finishes off with Liberty Paints. So, you know, Liberty Paints here, you certainly have some patriotic language that is going on. They have a picture of like a screaming eagle, you know, and certainly the eagle in the U.S. are synonymous. When you think of the word pure, what would be like words or synonyms that come to mind with pure? Righteousness, yeah. Some kind of like virtue, say clean. If it's clean, at least in a Tide commercial. If it's clean, it's also probably going to be. I mean, what kind of shirt are you going to? Look, I got the stain out. It's going to be a white. So yeah, clean, pure, all of those things. It's going to be white. So we're keeping America pure with Liberty Paints. You know, part of that underlying message is we're keeping America white with Liberty Paints. And we've already said this. What is their primary color? Optic white. Which now I have to draw my obligatory paint bucket. Because that's what I do for this chapter. There we go. All right. I was going to give it like a 6 out of 10. Got a little sloppy down there at the end. Where does the paint go?
Through the government.
Okay, so we got government buildings. We have government monuments. And Tim doesn't know this, but he also kind of wonders, at least, I wonder if it goes to at least the college, because he never mentions Tuskegee by name, but kind of question, does it go to the college? Because remember, at the college, they have that whitewash that's going on with the buildings. Any other like details, facts, kind of things we know about the paints? Not just the paint, but the factory itself. You said you had some symbolic stuff. How do you make optic paint? I think you got good stuff going on there. I'm not dismissing it. I'm trying to add on to it. What is like? What's his job to the paint to do to it? Okay, so you got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Some drops are bigger than other drops. And they call it the doping agent, you know, so you're putting in these 10 black drops. So you got black drops going into white paint, and then what happens to the paint?
Well, I know, like, in his, like, it turned out gray. And then, like, the guy was like,
depends which drops you put in.
Yeah.
Like, do you take the right stuff or do you take the wrong stuff? And so, yeah, one time he kind of messes it up. And hold on to that idea about him and Kimbrough when they look at it. But in theory, if he takes the right stuff, you put the 10 drops in, and the white paint then becomes white tur, which, you know, you're coloring with markers and crayons and colored pencils, not with paint for your fairy tale, fractured fairy tale. But anyone in art class knows that if I have white paint and I put some black stuff in it, what's happening to my paint? It's going to turn gray. And in some cases, like, it gets like black pretty quick, you know, kind of muddled and whatnot. So in some ways, this seems kind of like a little odd with it. Your point is that, all right, so Tim's kind of becoming submissive, or you know, African Americans in general are kind of becoming submissive. What's happening to the 10 drops that are going in? They're basically getting, by the paint, switch colors here, they're pretty much getting absorbed. And these black drops essentially become white. Anyone want to take, actually, Ryan, we're going to put this on you. What percentage of the population are African Americans for U.S. in 1950, late 40s, early 50s? You got two numbers going on. Pick one. 10%. You're a genius. Look at that. You're thriving now. So 10% of the population is going in, but what's happening? Coming out white. What's going on at the college? Whitewashing. What do we like to think of the United States as being symbolically? We're a melting pot. And so with it being a melting pot, besides a restaurant where you get little portions of food, if you're a melting pot, what happens with a melting pot? You get a mix, you get a blend, you know, you get a combination. Yeah, the term gets, and I think by referencing the term, it kind of helps to also strengthen what's happening here. But the hope, the idealistic view, is that the U.S. is going to be a melting pot. The realistic view is that what is it going to be? It's going to be a paint bucket where you have these things coming in, and in order for it to get accepted with these 10 drops, it's going to become perfectly white. Who comes up with optic white is the right white? Lucius Brockway. Lucius.
Cool name.
Lucius. That would be more like a Caesar name. Lucius Brockway. Lucius Brockway is. He's black. He's the black guy who basically runs the place. He's the one who gets paid for coming up with the slogan. He's the one who is, you could argue, being utilized, but he's also the one being what to run the paint place. If he's responsible for keeping the boilers running, he's responsible for keeping the paint flowing. Not that he's just kind of being whitewashed, but he's down in the basement. He's doing important stuff. He gets a little bit of a bonus for kind of coming up with the slogan, but he's not really getting any kind of recognition. If you use someone for your benefit without giving them what they deserve, you are exploiting that person. So you have this exploitation that's taking place, and it's to the point that he's paranoid that anyone could be coming in for his job. But you have this exploitation that what we're going to do is we're going to do whatever it takes in order for this to become pure, in order for this to become white, at the expense of any kind of ideals or whatnot. Now, when Paige talks about Tim and Kimbrough look at the paint, and Kimbrough goes, yep, that looks good. And when Tim sees it, it still kind of has some of those gray streaks in there. It could be a little bit of just an optical illusion. Sometimes you look at something, I see white, you see silver. But you also have two different people from two very different backgrounds taking a look at something that is purposely associated with U.S., with American government, and they see two very different things. So if you take me and Stella, you take, I don't know if I'm middle-aged yet, but older male, younger female, could we have different takes on one event, one person, one scene, one thing that's happening in the world? Absolutely. So the idea that, people of different background, race, religion, ethnicity, gender, whatever the case may be, that you see things differently certainly has some validity to it. And that's probably what's kind of going on with there. Kimbrough, it looks good enough. To Tim, something's kind of wrong with it. And really, one of the issues that Tim's having throughout the whole entire book is things just are looking wrong on a whole lot of levels. And he's somebody who recognizes that, but doesn't feel that other people do. Essentially, you kind of end up having a little bit of a satire going on here because there is social commentary about all of the issues then that are going to exist within the U.S. Subtle little scene. I don't remember if we talked about it last week or not. Chapter 1, boxing match. All right, we already said there's like the white blindfolds that would be going on as the white leaders are watching the black boys fight. There's also the burlesque dancer at the very beginning that is kind of running around. She has a tattoo of the American flag on her, right, on like her stomach. And you have this perversion that's kind of going on of American ideals. You have Liberty Paints with this patriotic association. There's a lot of things that are really kind of tying into the book that for U.S., for government, for leadership, if it's not white male, even if it's just white female, if it's not white male, it's probably not going to be good enough. What's the best way to survive? You have to assimilate, you have to be absorbed, and you're going to turn out the way that they want you to. And if you do that, if you agree to that whitewashing, things will be okay. The bucket, therefore, becomes very much tied into submission. Why cast down your bucket for that graduation speech? It's a submissive speech. What did we mention yesterday is Dr. Bledsoe's nickname to the students? He's Buckethead, which is more with look of what his head's going to be shaped like most likely. But by him being Buckethead, what is he doing for the white philanthropists, the trustees? He's assimilating to what they want him to do. So if that means keeping young, African-American men in the dark, he's perfectly fine with that. And now you have this paint bucket that's starting to kind of take shape here. So certainly, yeah, symbolism, satire, all those things are going on. To the point that who really despises Tim in this part? Who dislikes Tim? Once he sees him, this person cannot be here. Union guys do a little bit, but the one who's really upset with him is Brockway. What's the irony? The black guy doesn't like the black guy. So what's Brockway, what has he kind of doing? He's doing whatever is needed by the company, and he sees anyone is going to be a threat, whether it's someone similar in race, someone similar in ideals or whatnot, they're going to be a threat. If you were going to describe Brockway, adjectives, what would be words or what would be things that would describe Lucius Brockway? Word that's going to describe it. Okay. Suspicious, paranoid, anything along those lines. Paranoid's easier to spell, so that's why I wrote that one. Paranoid. What else? I mean, what's he do to get rid of Tim? Threatens to kill him. And then he almost does by, sabotaging the machinery. So, nope. You assume he's okay.
Wasn't the boiler an accident?
No, that's him messing with it to get that explosion to happen. And once he, because he's right there by the gauges, by the dials, and once he switches it and it explodes, you got Tim getting covered in this whiteness, he's kind of being whitewashed right there himself. But we certainly know he's someone who's violent. In some ways, you could even kind of maybe go ruthless a little bit. Is he in contact with many people? So he's in solitude, isolated, older, at least compared to Tim. Where does he live? Not an adjective. But where does he live? At least within the factory. Down in the basement. And mentioned that he is African American. Know any suspicious, violent African Americans who are older living in a basement by themselves? Tim. So you kind of prologue Tim. You think of the people that Tim does not like, or at least Tim is kind of, iffy about. He certainly wants revenge on Bloodsoe, someone who's hungry for power. He is really upset with True Blood for taking money from a white man for telling a story. What happens to Tim by the end of chapter 15?
He took money from a white guy
For his speech. So he's going to continue to do that. Same thing as True Blood. Certainly doesn't seem to be too crazy about this Brockway character, but basically all of these people is what he is kind of becoming. Brockway is someone who plays the game, undermines him with yeses. True Blood plays the game, undermines him with yeses. Bloodsoe plays the game, undermines him with yeses. The vet doctor tells Tim to play the game, undermine him with yeses. So kind of like how Siddhartha comes back full circle multiple times in that book, Tim keeps kind of coming back full circle. And remember, history is a spiral. It keeps coming back over and over and over again. In some ways, he's kind of having an internal struggle. He's almost kind of fighting himself when he has this fight with Brockway to try to figure out who he is. He wakes up then after this explosion, and he's in the hospital. When he wakes up in the hospital, what are things that he sees, hears, knows, senses, whatever? Like, what's his situation when he wakes up? Since we got the cuckoo's nest kind of parallel, it kind of starts to happen. Okay, so no memory. And it's so bad that he doesn't even know what his own name is. So no memory, no identity. And they hold that card, what's your name? And you finally thought, ooh, I'm going to find out his name. And then Paige went, I already know his name. So there wasn't that deep. What else? Where is he when he wakes up? Kind of. What's surrounding him? So he's in like a glass box. He's hooked up to wires and nodes. He's surrounded by what people? Doctors. What are some things that he hears? Here's the doctors talking. What else? So there's two other.
Oh, I was gonna say, like, doctors were, like, contemplating if they would shock him again or not.
Mm-hmm.
Or, like, it's pretty much at the point where it's, like,
And that's where certainly that cuckoo's nest idea comes in. And in Georgia in the 1930s, similar, not to the same degree, but, when you think of Holocaust and whatnot, Dr. Mandel, different experiments that were being done with Jews, they were taking African Americans from asylums, similar to where the vets would be, from the Golden Day, and that's when they were practicing different experiments with sterilization and electric shock and whatnot, because the idea was if there's a group of people that we're going to experiment with, it may as well be those people. So that's kind of part of what Allison's alluding to with those doctors. But what's he hear? He hears doctor voices. There's a woman screaming. And then because it's Allison, we also hear some music in the background. There's always music. Beethoven's Fifth is playing in the background. No memory. Glass box hooked up to wires, nodes. There's a tube going to his stomach. Woman screaming in the background. He's in a hospital. Doesn't know who he is. You've been there. I've been there. When you were born. So what's kind of serving in this part is you're getting a bit of a rebirth that takes place where in some ways you kind of have a little bit of a new Tim kind of starts to occur. And I'd say the biggest difference that you kind of start to have at this point is you have a person who's going from being a little bit more passive to someone who is a little bit more assertive. And it doesn't mean that he's necessarily a better person, but there's definitely at the very least a shift or a change that is occurring. What's my favorite line in the whole entire book? I am what I am. Page 266, right? See it right there? Absolutely. Absolutely.
Is that the most famous?
That's the best one. It's not far. I am what I am. Should be on. That should be in your children's book. That you're putting together. You should just kind of slide that in there. What's making him so? What's going on with that part where he goes, "I am what I am"? That are making him feel what? Nostalgic, okay? And they're being peddled as Carolina yams and whatnot. And so as he's eating it, he's going like, "This is my birthmark. This is who I am." Remember what he was doing those 90 pages before, where you look like a pork chop and grits kind of guy. Nope, I don't want that. I want coffee. I want orange juice. I want toast. I want a northern businessman kind of special breakfast. Now, after this whole rebirth is kind of taking place, he's starting to embrace a little bit more of who he is. You have a person who's taking action. He's giving speeches now when he feels so challenging something. Doesn't mean he doesn't do better yet, but you at least have a little bit of a new starting to what he is presenting himself. Yeah, give me a quick second.